Hey guys, welcome back. Thomas Goldcamp here with 24/7 Sports and Swamp247.com. A ton of Florida basketball news has happened since the season ended and Florida exited the NCAA tournament. We've talked about it on this channel a couple times. Florida's had 4 guys transfer out. On Thursday night, we learned that there would be now a 6th departure from the program, with guard Scottie Lewis opting to enter the NBA draft. He will sign with an agent. He is officially gone, along with Tre Mann and the 4 transfers departing from the program. At this point, Mike White has a full-on rebuild on his hands. There's no doubt about it. Colin Castleton is a 7th guy that has entered his name into the NCAA. Sorry, not the transfer portal. He's actually entered his name into the NBA draft. He has not signed with an agent, and so I kind of would expect him back. But if he were to leave, Florida would lose every single starter from its opening day lineup this season. Keontae Johnson, obviously, we're not sure exactly what's going to happen with him, but I think at this point, probably less likely to play than to play next year. So Florida is going to have a massive turnover. Scottie Lewis's transfer actually comes just a few hours after Florida Athletics Director Scott Stricklin was on a local radio program and really endorsed Coach Mike White, said he expects that Mike White will be at Florida, quote unquote, for a long, long time. And I think those comments didn't necessarily sit well with a lot of fans who are kind of a little bit over the Mike White experiment. And so I wanted to take this time to chat with you guys and give you a chance to listen to Scott Stricklin's comments yourselves, kind of evaluate them for yourselves, and then I'll give you a little bit of an idea of where I stand on it. I think right now the big question for a lot of Florida fans is when you have 6 guys departing from the program, it feels a little bit like rats sinking or jumping from a sinking ship. And I think that's kind of been the vibe that a lot of players have when you talk about guys like Scottie Lewis entering the NBA draft. I think a lot of fans don't think he's ready. Certainly athletically he has the talent, but he has really not developed in 2 years. You talk about a guy like Noah Locke, who's a 3-year guy, searching for an opportunity elsewhere in the transfer portal. To me, that's not indicative of a healthy program, and I think that's where a lot of fans are a little bit upset. But, Scott Stricklin made the point that the transfer portal's happening everywhere. There's a lot of programs that are having to build through the transfer portal. Record numbers of guys are entering. Take a listen to Scott Stricklin's comments about Mike White, where he sees things right now in the NCAA transfer portal.
I've had several conversations with Coach White, and it's not unusual. We always talk at the end of the year, and what went well, and what we need to work on. I do that with all of our coaches, not just Coach White. And had really productive conversations. I think the world of Mike. I'm really excited that his future here. I think he's going to be the head coach of the Florida Gators for a long, long time. And he's dealing with something, as you mentioned, Chris, that seemingly everybody in college basketball is dealing with these days, which is the transfer situation. And it's changing the way I think coaches are going to be putting their roster together. And you've already seen it, and you got to give credit to schools like Gonzaga and Baylor. I think they may have been on the cutting edge. 4 of Baylor's 6 leading scorers are transfers, and Gonzaga has kind of been in that area for quite a while. They kind of built their program based on that. I think that's going to be happening more and more places because the numbers are remarkable. I looked this morning. There are 40 players in the SEC currently in the transfer portal, and 10 of the 14 schools have multiple players in the transfer portal. And I know Gator fans feel like there's that Florida's had a lot this year. We're not the most. There's 2 or 3 other schools that have had more players in the portal this year than the Gators have. And this is not new. We've had this in years past. But the notion that you bring in a signing class and then you're going to grow them for 4 years is, as much as we all love that model, that's really not the reality of how the young people coming into college basketball, by and large, see it. There's some exceptions, but by and large, you see young people, looking at the portal as an opportunity to get quicker satisfaction on playing time or something that's not right in their mind. So that's not. I don't think that's going away. And the good news is I think. In recent years, Gators have really benefited from the transfers. When you look at Jalen Hudson or Igor Kulichev or Kenyon Berry or KJ Blackshear and Tyree Appleby this year, Anthony DeRuggia, we've had some really good players who have been contributors that way, and I think you'll continue to see that. There are close to, this is a staggering number, there are close to 2,000 players nationally basketball players in the transfer portal.
That's ridiculous.
Close to two. It's about 1,900,
Yeah.
which is already more than occurred all of last year through August. So last year they counted through August, and it was a little over 1,800 last year. There's already close to 1,900, and obviously we're just in March or now April. So it's something I think every coach is going to have to be dealing with, and I think Mike is well positioned to get out there. I know he's had a lot of conversations with a lot of those young men who are in the portal looking for a new home and considering Florida.
And so, again, I think, there's a lot of validity to what Scott Stricklin is saying. I do think the NCAA transfer portal is going to become a bigger part of the recruiting process. I think that's already happened. I think coaches are going to continue to try to build their roster via the transfer portal. And I think, to Mike White's credit, I think he's done a really good job there. I think he's been able to land a number of highly talented prospects from the transfer portal. Actually, just before recording this, we learned that Florida has landed a commitment from UMKC's Brandon McKissick. He's a guy from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, who scored 17.2 points per game, a 6'3" guard, really good looking player, and one of the most coveted guys in the portal. He's going to join the Gators next fall, but with 6 departures, he's not the only one that Mike White needs to land. The Gators really are going to have to do a good job in the transfer portal. And to Scott Stricklin's point, I think that's going to be a continuing theme for this Florida program. I think the bigger issue for me is that when you're having to rebuild your roster, a couple times throughout the course of your career, this is not the first time we've seen Mike White have to really turn over a roster. If you look back a few years to when he had Keith Stone, DeAndre Ballard, Micah Carew, a couple of those other guys, there was an offseason where Florida really replaced 6-7 guys. And you finally got to the point where I thought this year was a year where you had a couple guys that had been in the program for multiple years. You're talking about Tre Mann, Scottie Lewis, talented guys, Keontae Johnson, Noah Locke, and then you add transfers that make an impact like Colin Castleton. That's about as veteran a team as we've seen from Mike White, and yet you still saw a lot of consistency issues. And I think one of the big reasons for that I've touched on in the past is I think there's been an inconsistency of approach from Mike White, not just in terms of style and how they play on the court, but I think he really tries to adjust quite a bit to what his players' strengths are. And I think that's a good quality in a coach. And I think that there's some definite positives in that you can even point to on Mike White's resume that point to that. But I think the bigger issue is it becomes very hard to develop consistency from year to year. Coaches tend to have the most success when they have veteran guys that have been through, understand the philosophy that you're trying to preach, understand the style that you're trying to preach, and then those guys can kind of disseminate information to the younger players. I'm not sure that we've seen that. And again, so I kind of bounce back and forth between Mike White's ability to adjust, which I think is there, being a positive versus being a negative. Scott Stricklin at this point, though, made it very clear that he's fully in Mike White's corner. I want you to take a listen to the explanation he gave of kind of what he's looking for in a coach, how he evaluates a coach, the reasons he thinks patience is the right approach when trying to build a long-term consistent winner. Take a listen.
I love the passion of Gator fans, and Gator fans who aren't happy unless there's a championship trophy hoisted at the end of the year. You have nothing to apologize for, because that is every one of our coaches and our student athletes and everyone who works in the UAA. That is our goal. Unfortunately, in athletics, every team doesn't get to do that every year. And what's I really value, something I value is your program in a position where it can compete at that level on a consistent basis, because I truly believe the teams that end up holding those trophies are the ones that have been consistently good for a long period of time. And I'll use a couple examples. Billy Donovan, who did such a great job here. He had a period of 5 years, relatively early in his time here at UF, where he never got past the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. Lost first round a couple of those times, Manhattan one time, I think. And, no one panicked. No one, pulled the plug. I think those were years 5, 6, 7, 8, or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. And, there was frustration, I know, but you got to give Jeremy Foley a lot of credit. He didn't buckle, and he stayed the course. And because they were consistently getting themselves in position, some things lined up. They got the right guys on campus, and they go win 2 national championships. And so, you've got, this is a long play. You look at the coaches who have the top 2 teams in the country right now. Scott Drew's been at Baylor 18 years. I think Mark Few is 21 years or 22 years at Gonzaga. Calvin Sampson has been at Houston 7 or 8 years, but that guy's got a lot of experience coaching college basketball. I think that is a sport that you find a really hardworking, talented, smart individual to lead your program, and then you can't treat it like every game is life or death. You got to have a longer term view there, and you step back and you look at okay, are we doing that? Well, we've been one of 12 teams have been in the NCAA tournament each of the last 4 years. One of only 6 that has advanced in the tournament each of the last 4 years. And and I know, again, Gator fans say, well, there's no title in there, and I get that. Mike White and myself are as frustrated as anybody about that. But you start looking at you make it you can convince yourself, if you're not careful, that that's easy to do. And then you step back and you look at the people who haven't been able to do it, and you realize it's not as easy as just throwing a ball out there. This year, Kentucky doesn't go to the NCAA tournament. Duke, Louisville, Indiana don't go to the NCAA tournament. And then a couple schools that we're used to seeing compete for the Final Four that got in, Michigan, North Carolina, don't win a game in the NCAA tournament. And so my point is, it's not just the name on the chest that's going to get you there. You've got to consistently put yourself in position, and I believe you do that, you're gonna have your turn. The other example I was going to use on consistency is Kevin O'Sullivan. He had taken better teams to Omaha and lost twice really quick, and he would tell you that that 2017 team wasn't his most talented team he took to Omaha, but he got there, got some breaks, stars lined, and Gators brought a trophy home. So I think that's that's what you look for. Are you putting yourself in position, your team in position, on a routine basis, to where you can take advantage when the breaks go your way, and you can put some good teams together.
And so I agree with a lot of what Scott Stricklin is saying in theory. I do think that patience is an underrated approach from administrators. I think especially in football, a lot of times the plug gets pulled too early, and you can do a lot of harm to your program by doing that. I don't think Florida's in danger of that at this point. You're following up Billy Donovan. You've given Mike White 6 years. There has been success. I think the biggest disconnect for me between Scott Stricklin's comments and kind of where the UAA seems to stand, I do think that they overstate just a little bit how competitive Mike White has been. Yes, he's been very good at getting Florida into the NCAA tournament. He's been very good at getting Florida a seat at the table where you have a chance to make a deep run and potentially get to the Final Four, win a national championship. I think those are the long-term goals at Florida. Where I disagree is that I think White has shown fairly consistently that they're not always that competitive on a routine basis in the SEC. I think the NCAA tournament is a tricky metric to kind of base your argument around, and it seems to me that Stricklin and the UAA have kind of latched on to that. I think that Mike White's NCAA tournament success is very impressive, and a lot of fans will say, "Oh yeah, but we lost in the round of 32. We've lost in the round of 32 3 straight times. We lost to a 15 seed." I just think that's such a small sample of games that win or lose, right or wrong. I think it could be used negatively against coaches too, in the wrong way. I think that's too small of a sample size. There's too many variables. One bad matchup, a player missing here, a player goes hot there. All of a sudden, you lose a game that you shouldn't, or you win a game that maybe you shouldn't have won. I think that's a bad metric. I like to look at SEC regular season contention. For me, I think the bar at Florida should be to at least every 3 to 4 seasons be in a position to win an SEC regular season title. I don't think that's too big of an ask. Billy Donovan won 6 SEC regular season titles in 19 years. I don't know that anybody's going to match that, but I think you should be in the realm. Every 3 to 4 years, be within 1-2 games of the SEC title. Mike White has not been there consistently enough for me. You look at, what he's done. 2nd place finish, 3rd place finish, 4th place finish, 5th place finish, and then 2 8th place finishes. He's finished an average of 4.2 games back from the SEC lead. To me, I'm not quite sure that's getting it done. To Scott Stricklin's point, yes, it's difficult to win a championship. That's absolutely true. On the flip side, guess how many coaches have won an SEC title since Mike White took over as Florida coach? 6 different coaches have won an SEC title. And yes, there's split titles in there, but that's 6 different coaches were able to get to the point where they had their team winning enough games to win an SEC regular season title. 3 different coaches have won an SEC tournament title. Mike White, closest he's finished is 2 games back from the SEC title. He's only once advanced to the SEC tournament semifinals. To me, that's a much broader sample size of games to judge on. And I think that's just talking about results. That's just evaluating on results. I think when you look at what's actually happening on the court and from year to year in terms of the inconsistency, The only consistent thing has been that there's been the same kinds of breakdowns. You even go back to Florida's Elite Eight run in Mike White's second season. You go back to that Wisconsin game that they won in the Sweet 16. They were up 12 with about 10 minutes to play. All of a sudden, Florida takes the air out of the ball. Wisconsin gets hot. They go on a run. Florida goes cold. Game goes to overtime, and all of a sudden you need a Chris Chiozza miracle buzzer beater 3 to advance to the Elite Eight. Sound familiar? Yeah, that's happened quite a bit in Mike White's tenure, and I think you see that happen a lot in SEC play. Florida will win 3 or 4 games. They kind of lose the plot, lose a game that they shouldn't, like South Carolina this year at home. Those are the kind of consistent issues that I see when you break down the actual play. And I think a lot of that stems from just over adjustment. I think Mike White's ability to adjust is definitely a positive. And I think, I've sat down with him in a room with other media members when he's had kind of a coaching clinic and broke down exactly what he does when he's going through game tape with players. He is extremely detail oriented. I do think he's extremely intelligent. He's a very, very smart X's and O's coach. I think the problem is, particularly when you have so much roster turnover, such that you're constantly working with young guys or transfers coming in trying to learn a new system, there's a lot of things that get lost, I think, in the dissemination of his vision, that X's and O's, when it translates down to the players. And I think the lack of consistent approach is kind of the problem I have with, Mike White and considering him a guy that's kind of, quote unquote, getting Florida consistently to the table, getting them a spot at the dance. The other thing I really took issue with Scott Stricklin's comments, I think the comparisons that he gave were, by and large, pretty misguided. Let's talk about it. Mike White, he's had 6 years. I know no situation is apples to apples, but I think the comparisons that he made, yes, Billy Donovan, had a team that lost to Manhattan in the NCAA tournament. Again, small sample size. Anything can happen. What he's not talking about there is Billy Donovan also won 2 SEC regular season titles in his first 6 years. He won 3 division titles in his first 6 years. He made a national title appearance in his first 6 years. So it's not apples to apples with Mike White. Mike White doesn't have that hardware. And yes, it is hard to win those. But again, 6 coaches have done it since Mike White took over at Florida. Mark Few, we're talking about very, very different circumstances, obviously being more of a mid-major program. But he won 5 conference titles and 5 tournament titles in his first 6 years. You've earned the patience at that point. Billy Donovan, you've been to the national championship game. You won 2 SEC titles in your first 6 years. You've earned the patience. I'm not sure that Mike White has earned that patience just yet when you look at his overall body of work. Scott Drew at Baylor, from a record standpoint, he, definitely didn't deserve the patience. That completely ignores the context of Baylor was coming out of a massive scandal with Coach Dave Bliss. They had NCAA sanctions. There were plenty of reasons why Scott Drew was going to get a lot of patience. And it wasn't because he was winning games. It was because of the situation that he inherited. Mike White inherited a very different situation. May not have had the best roster. Billy Donovan didn't make the NCAA tournament in his final season, so there were some issues. I'm not saying he inherited a perfect situation, but he inherited a very good foundation, not like Scott Drew at Baylor. That's a bad comparison. And then Kevin O'Sullivan, you want to talk about that comparison? To me, that one's ludicrous. Kevin O'Sullivan won the SEC twice in the toughest conference in baseball. I think it's a lot harder to win an SEC baseball title than it is to win an SEC basketball title. Yes, you go against Kentucky in basketball. Yes, they're a constant roadblock, but you do not have the level of depth that you have in the SEC baseball. And so not only did Kevin O'Sullivan win the SEC regular season twice, he won a conference tournament. Again, Mike White hasn't advanced past the semifinals. He also reached the College World Series 3 times, including the National Championship Series, and he recruited such that he had a very clear vision. Kevin O'Sullivan very much recruited pitching and defense, and his teams reflected that. I'm not sure that we've seen Mike White recruit to a consistent style. Are they recruiting to run a fast-paced, up-tempo offense? Okay, why take an Andrew Nemhard? Why take a KJ Blackshear? To me, the constant going back and forth between different styles, it seems very much like a best player available approach in terms of recruiting. And so while that looks good on paper, you get 5 stars like Scottie Lewis, like Tre Mann. I don't think that Mike White has been able to consistently implement his vision, consistently implement a system. I think that shows up in the bigger body of work when you talk about SEC play. And that's why I'm not quite on the same page as Scott Stricklin. Mike White's going to get a chance to prove what he can do. I just think at this point, where the fans are in terms of very quickly approaching a level of apathy that's going to be tough to overcome. I know it's not football. It doesn't drive the revenue, so you can afford to be a little bit more patient like with basketball. But I just think it's going to be a severe uphill climb for Mike White. I think he will put together a good roster. I think Florida's going to land some really key transfers. Brandon McKissick, 17 points per game. That's a really good addition. I think he won't be the last really good addition. I just struggle to see whether Mike White will be able to continue to overcome such massive roster turnover and really start to build towards a vision and identity. Maybe he's figured that out, that needs to be, the approach, that it needs to be more consistent. Maybe he'll hire an assistant coach that's great and can help him execute that vision. But for me, through 6 years, I have not seen enough to make me confident in that. I have not seen enough in the body of work so far to be as confident as Scott Stricklin is. Maybe Stricklin changes his tune after next year. Again, there's a $7 million buyout here right now. If he were to get fired, that's a really tough pill to swallow. Maybe things change next year when it's more like $5.75 million buyout. And, maybe Florida struggles to get all these transfers that are going to have to be working together with new people, different egos, all in one, roster. Maybe that changes next year. I'm not sure. I just know which side of the fence I'm on right now. And I think the lack of consistency for me is very glaring. I think Scott Stricklin made a couple pretty disingenuous comparisons in talking about why he's giving Mike White patience. Maybe he has the right approach. Maybe Mike White will work out in the long run. I'm not on that side of the fence at this point. If you guys like the video, be sure to hit like and subscribe. We'll be back. We're going to produce a lot more videos over the coming weeks. I'm actually going to sit down today with Blake Alderman of swamp247.com. We're going to shoot a podcast talking a little bit of Pro Day and some other Florida athletics. But stay tuned to the channel. We appreciate you guys tuning in. If you're liking the content, be sure to hit like and subscribe, and we'll be back next time.